Guns. We know it's a big issue in the US, and because there's been a lot of mass shootings recently, and the mass shootings, like, they've been happening for a while now. They haven't stopped, and it's been a string of, I guess, four mass shootings now, like Uvalde and uh, the was it the grocery store uh, with the black people near the person who targeted them, and then two others, and then like before, was it before that, after that, or and one happened in a hospital. Uh, and other than that, gun crime, and gun death in general in the U.S. is a lot. But in Canada, mass shootings aren't like as big an issue, especially not on schools. But there are still some gun deaths, and I'm not fully clear on the all of the policies of Canada, but I wanted to uh, educate myself since recently Prime Minister Trudeau talked about a new law that apparently would ban the sale of handguns and um, sort of the like trading off or like reselling it of the guns. But first we need to like fully know what the law is talking about. So here's the headline. Let me wait to the amid a wave of mass shootings in the US, Canada tightens gun laws. The handgun market in Canada has been frozen as Parliament reviews sweeping legal action, including a mandatory buyback of some rifles. Okay, so there's also talk of some, like, I guess, buyback of rifles. It was an unusually hectic week of announcements and news from Canada. A freeze on handgun sales and transfers, the introduction of a gun reform bill that includes a buyback of military style assault rifles. I guess we can look at that as well. Uh, Another damning report on sexual misconduct in the military with a roadmap for ending it. Decriminalization of the possession of small. Oh, okay, the rest of the stuff isn't relevant. Last week in this newsletter, my colleague Vyoza Izai discussed how little Canada knows about the source of its so-called ghost gun problem. So we're just getting info on all of this stuff so we can look into it. Given the sweeping gun measures announced this week, let's stay with the topic. Two of the government's plans dominated the news. First, Canada moved immediately to freeze the selling, gifting, trading, and importing of handguns. It's not a ban, but it does mean that the number of handguns legally owned by Canadians outside the military and the police will not increase from the estimated 900,000 owned now. So legally, I guess Canada has 900,000 guns. What we might also need to look at is how much guns Canada has illegally. The other attention grabber was the government's decision to follow up on its earlier ban of military style assault rifles with a mandatory buyback program. So it's a mandatory buyback program. So people who have these so called military style assault rifles would have to give, like, this, would have to give the government their guns and then receive some compensation. The proposed legislation, however, goes beyond the freeze and the ban. It would strip people of their firearms licenses if they had been involved in domestic violence or criminal harassment. Um, I don't know what criminal harassment means. Is it like sexual violence or like physical violence or stuff like that? Or and yeah, I sort of agree that people who are involved in domestic violence shouldn't have firearm licenses. So yeah, that doesn't seem like that bad of a decision. Increase penalties for firearms offenses and require people who a judge has found to be a threat to themselves or others to turn over their guns to the police. So far, other than like I guess the entire Reese part, the rest of it sounds pretty good because I'm not sure like how much this freeze would have an effect on gun crime in Canada. Uh, Not too familiar with the topic, so that's something else we might have to look into. The announcement made late Monday followed several recent mass shootings in the US, particularly the devastating attack on an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas last week. As of Friday, some 20 mass shootings had taken place over 9 days in that country, a rate of more than two a day. Okay, that's a lot more than I thought there were. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cited the horrific killings when he announced the proposals. But given the complexity of introducing any government bill to Parliament, it's unlikely that a current proposal was put together after the Uvalde shootings. So he was planning on this for a while, I guess. One point somewhat lost in the shuffle is that the handgun freeze won't need Parliament's approval. It was already put into effect through a relatively brief series of changes to the Firearms Act. That's interesting. I thought it had to go through the Parliament, so uh, I'm learning. My colleague Max Fisher wrote an explainer contrasting how the Parliament in Canada has acted quickly on gun control, where the United States has remained gridlocked on the. Okay, that's tangential, not relevant to what we're looking at. The government plans to have a formal guidance for gun owners, gun shops, and the small number of people exempt from the new rules, including Olympic and Paralympic athletes. I guess for the specific shooting events within the next few weeks, given the time and lag involved in obtaining a firearms license. The government also hopes to prevent people who don't hold licenses from stocking up on guns last minute before the new directive goes into effect. At least one aspect of gun laws is not changing. The rules that basically limit handgun use to target practice at an approved firing range at home, handgun owners must continue to keep their weapons locked up. That's I don't know how they would enforce that, but that seems like a decent enough law. And it's still illegal to use a handgun against another person in any circumstance. What if someone breaks into your home? The farmer who shot and killed Colton Bushy, a 22-year-old Cree man from Saskatchewan, was acquitted of murder and manslaughter in 2018 but was fined 3,900 Canadian dollars and placed under a 10-year ban on gun ownership for improper firearm storage. Okay, that's another interesting thing in Canada that's different from the US. This week's proposed legislation and change to the handgun rules were praised by multiple gun control groups. There is no right to own guns in this country. Wendy Cukier, the president of the Coalition for Gun Control, said in a statement, legal handguns are a significant source of handguns used in crime and are the guns most often used in mass shootings. There aren't that many mass shootings in Canada, though, right? But Raquel Dancho, the Conservative member of parliament who speaks for the party on public safety matters, criticized the bill on Twitter, saying it doesn't deal with what she views as the root cause of gun violence in our cities: illegal guns smuggled into Canada by criminal gangs. Just over a year ago, the Canada Border Agency announced a joint task force with its counterpart in the United States to stem the cross border flow of guns. Many people welcome the changes but urge the government to go even further. John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, called for a national ban on handguns. It could happen in Canada. I mean, there's no reason it couldn't. There's no way of knowing if the handgun freeze and the assault weapons buyback program will affect gun crimes and gun related suicides. A review of international firearms legislation prepared by the Public Safety Department's Research Division in 2020 and released under the Access to Information laws found little to no quantitative evidence for the effectiveness of firearm buyback programs in reducing firearm violence. This one's not linked. Public Safety Department's Research Division. And a study released last November by Dr. Kaylin Langman of the Medical School at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, found that while there may be an association between legislation and a reduction in suicide rate by firearms, overall suicide remained unaffected due to substitution into other methods. Um, but isn't there like some research on how guns are like such an easy way to that people who wouldn't like if they had time to think not commit suicide, but with guns it becomes easier for them to. Many people pushing for tighter gun control also noted that women are disproportionately affected by gun crimes. The presence of guns is our first indicator that fatal intimate partner violence is a high risk. Amanda Dale, a family lawyer in Brampton, Ontario, said in a statement in response to the gun reform bill, "For those who feel today their privileges have been scaled back, I would remind them that this is not the same as being stalked, threatened, and killed by the person who is supposed to love you." Okay, this might be a different story. I'm not sure. Uh, France, Canada. Hmm. Okay, this doesn't seem relevant. Okay, I don't know why that was there in the end. So, but what this is saying is that the government is having a freeze on handguns and a buyback for rifles and sort of stopping access of firearm licenses for people who commit domestic violence and um what do you call them, people who commit domestic violence and mm, some other crimes, like the way the wording they use was a bit strange. What did they call it? Assault something, whatever. uh but you can't use your in Canada you can't use your guns outside ranges either, and that also the point that the handgun trees won't need parliament's approval. Okay, let's look at stats for gun laws. um, like let me search. not gun laws, guns. Like how many guns there are, how many illegal ones there are, and violence and all of that. Let me find a good source. Gun ownership stats. Um, oh, no, this isn't it. I'm trying to find a source that doesn't seem biased as well. But I found a site, but I don't know where the sources are from. So, no source cited. Canada Safety Council. Still nothing. I found something that I guess we can look at. Um, let's see. Yeah, so this one is about the trends in firearm related violent crime in Canada. It's from 2009 to 2020. There's some statistics Canada, so it's reliable. The highlights: firearm related violent crime represents a small proportion of police reported violent crime in Canada, accounting for 2.8% of all victims of violent crime reported by police in 2020. So it's not even that like immediate of an issue in compared to like in the US. Um, so it could be like I guess political point scoring. The culture doesn't seem to be as big as in the US either. Uh, but let's look at the stats anyways. In 2020, the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were 8,344 victims of police related violent crimes where a firearm was present during the commission of the offense, or a rate of 29 per 100,000 population. This rate was unchanged when compared to 2019. This was not the case in all jurisdictions, however, as rates of firearm related violence increased in some areas and decreased in others. Between 2019 and 2020, notable increases in firearm related violent crime were reported in southern rural British Columbia plus 34, the northern rural part of Ontario plus 32, rural Alberta plus 32, and plus 31 in the south. So it increased in some places, but not in the others. Between 2009 and 2013, the rate of victims of firearm related violence and crime in Canada decreased, which aligned with violent crime trends overall. However, rates of victims of firearm related violent crime started an upward climb in 2014, with the largest documented increase between 2014 and 2015. So it did increase a bit, I guess. The article examines firearm related violent crimes in the 2 6 year periods before and after the notable increase in 2015. Between 2009 to 2014 and 2015 to 2020, and shows that the increase occurred in most jurisdictions in Canada. Much of the increase in the rate of firearm related crime between the 2 6 year periods was the result of significant increase in the rate of firearm specific violent offenses of discharging a firearm with intent, pointing a firearm, and use of firearm in an indictable offense. Okay, here's some actual stats. In 2020, police reported a total of 743 homicide victims in Canada, or a rate of 1.95 per 100,000 population. For 217, 7 of these victims, a firearm was used to commit the homicide. So there were 743 homicides, I guess, victims in Canada, and then out of them 277. So this is like less than 1/3. No, wait. I guess a bit more than 1/3. After a gradual decrease between 2009 and 2013, the rate of firearms related homicides has increased since 2013 with a single decline in 2018. Okay, as a result, the proportion of homicides that involved a firearm rose from 26% of all homicides, a little lower. It was 26% in 2013 and 37% in 2020. In that sense, like, I guess since the homicide crimes are so low already, the increase is significant in that sense, from 26% to 37%. So I guess the laws are relevant in that case. The handguns were the most serious weapon present in the majority of firearm-related violence crime between 2009 and 2014, 59%, and between 2015 and 2020, 59%. Oh, it's still almost the same. Not almost the same, it is the same. 59%. Rates of firearm-related violent crime were higher in rural areas than in urban centers. That's interesting because usually in urban centers this stuff happens more, but notably high in northern rural regions. Okay, I guess. However, fire-related crime generally accounted for a higher proportion of violent crime in urban cities. Wait, rates were higher, but when crime did happen in urban centers, involved guns relatively in that sense more. As such, people living in some rural areas may be more at risk of firearm crime, but violent crime that occurs in urban areas are generally more likely to involve a firearm. Okay, I guess rural areas are less safer in terms of like firearm violence in relative terms. But if a crime does happen in urban areas that involves violence, then it's going to be with some firearms. In 2020, more than 6 in 10, 63% of the firearms related violent crimes in urban areas involved handguns. So, and handguns keep coming up. In rural areas, the firearm present was most commonly a rifle or shotgun, 46% in the rural south and 39% in the rural north. I can't say rural for, well, I don't know why. But okay, so handguns, like, they're more prevalent in urban areas in that sense. In 2020, over 4 out of 5, 83% of victims of violent crime where fire was present were either not injured Okay, so even with the crimes, most of the people that were involved in that violent crime were not injured, which is 61%, or they sustained a minor injury that required no professional medical treatment or some sort of first aid. 22% victims of firearm related violent crimes were less likely to be injured than victims where no firearm was present, but were more likely to sustain a serious injury or die. Okay, so like not firearm related crime, people were more likely to be injured, but less likely to sustain something serious, like serious or die in that sense. The accused in firearm related violent crimes was most frequently a stranger to the victim. That's also interesting. In 2020, for 55% of male victims and 41% of female victims. For female victims, it wasn't a stranger, but for male victims, it was most likely a stranger. This was driven, however, by firearm related violence in urban areas. Overall, 1 in 4, 25% female victims of firearm related violent crimes was victimized by a current or former spouse or other intimate partner. Okay, so then maybe knew the person, but not like a partner or whatever. That's only 25%. And thus, 2.2% of male victims of firearm related violent crime in 2020 were similarly victims of intimate partner violence. So that's where I think the domestic violence thing would help reducing that 25%. Instead, among victims, a higher proportion of males were victimized by a stranger, friend, or casual acquaintance. Okay, so 83% versus 64%. For women, firearm related intimate partner violence was most frequent in rural areas. In 2020, there were 8.1 female victims of firearm related IPV per 100,000 female population in the rural south and 31 in per 100,000 in the rural north, compared to 4.1 in the urban areas. Okay, that is much higher. Firearm related IPV accounted for nearly one third of female victims in the rural south and 38% in the rural north. Oh, okay. So out of all, okay, that's okay. Although firearm related IPV for male victims was also high in rural areas, rates were very low compared to females, 1.4 and 2.8 and zero point 0.9 for urban areas. The majority of incidents involving a victim of firearm related violent crimes were solved with at least one accused identified, with those in the rural north 83% and rural south 72%, more often solved than in urban areas 54%. I guess it's because they're strangers. The individual accused were predominantly male, 87%. Male accused, 88%, were more likely than females, 82% to be charged for in the incident. So when they're accused, out of them, 88% were charged and 82% were not. And it's 87% males that are accused versus only 13% females. Youth were less likely to be charged than young adults or older. In 2020, among police, there was reported information on organized crime or gang related criminal activity 6% of victims of firearm-related violent crimes were victims in incidents that police identified as confirmed or suspected to be committed by and for the benefit of a criminal organization or street gang. Most 75% of these victims were male. So that proportion is low as well, like for criminal organizations or gangs. That's where most of the narrative of like illegal firearms, I think, comes from with gangs and criminal organizations. Okay, now let's look at some other thing. Firearm restrictions in Canada. There are three categories: prohibited, restricted, and non-restricted. Prohibited are fully automatic firearms, sawed-off rifles, shotguns, and other firearms with strict within regulations. Handguns are classified as restricted, while rifles and shotguns also look as long guns are usually non-restricted. That's interesting. That I guess I get with shotguns, but which sorts of rifles? Canadian law requires that an individual have a valid license in order to own or possess a firearm. Various amendments have been made to the Criminal Code and the Firearms Act over the past decade. In 2012, Bill C-19, ending the Long Gun Registry Act, eliminated the registration of non-restricted firearms. That's interesting. So they ended that registry. Why would you do that? Further amendments were later introduced related to restricted and prohibited weapons and to the licensing, tracing, and transportation of firearms in 2020. Following the mass shooting in Nova Scotia, the federal government amended regulations by order in council to reclassify as prohibited over 1,500 models and variants of assault-style firearms, particularly semi-automatic rifles. There are apparently data gaps related to firearms as well. There's little known information currently collected about the characteristics of these firearms, such as details about the exact type of gun, who owned it, how it was stored, and whether the owner was licensed. In addition, while some police services collect information on shootings, there is no consistent definition of a shooting applied by police services in Canada, nor are there consistent criteria used to assess whether a shooting actually occurred. That's a bit weird. Example, okay. Of particular concern, there is currently little information available to determine the source of firearm usage in crime. For example, whether the gun used in the crime was stolen, illegally purchased, or smuggled into the country. This is something that, like, I guess they have to look into that they haven't. This is not recorded by police services, recorded inconsistently, or some places the information is simply not available. For example, not all firearms are recovered from the homicides. Only some of these guns are available for tracing. The RCMP administered by the Ontario blah blah blah. Nature of okay, so there's some confusion about the nature of firearms related violence as well. Okay. Okay, so they're I guess they're trying, but it will take years for these changes to fully implemented. These changes include collecting information on the number of firearms recovered, seized, or stolen. That's good. Improving measures related to shootings by developing a standard definition to be used by. Okay, yeah, that's good. Developing a standard definition for the crime gun. Okay, yeah, makes sense. It represents less than 3% of violent crime. Okay, 21% was uh, from stuff that was available close by, like a knife or blunt equipment, or a physical force was used. What's the majority? That being said, just over three-quarters of victims of violent crimes involved an incident where no weapon was present. Okay, so the biggest thing is like just, I guess, people fighting. I don't know, like just your hands bare. That's okay, sure. Fire related are highest in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Northern Territories. Due to high rates of robbery and major assaults of was present. The second highest combined rate of firearm homicide and murder in 2020. Oh, okay, so fewer than 2% in all three. Oh, okay, so they just have higher crime. And here's a chart. Firearm related violent crime rates as a and as a percentage of all violent crime. Selected census metropolitan areas 2020. Okay, so the blue line is firearm related violent crimes as a percentage of all violent crime, and the rate of fire. Okay, so some of them are, all of them are really low, but then some of them are really, really low, like Thunder Bay, which is less than 10 per 100,000 people. And uh, Toronto is low as well, but the highest is like slightly above 60. And then Regina and Brentford were like the highest. It's also the highest in terms of the crime being done. Um, in Toronto, it's slightly above 4%. So what I'm getting by this is that it's not the biggest issues. It's risen a bit in recent years. There's not enough data on whether it's like legal guns that cause the violence or illegal guns that cause the violence. So the effect on of this on gun violence isn't that known. That being said, there isn't like a vigor or like as extensive a gun culture, so there isn't a lot of pushback on this. And mostly it's like a wait and see type of thing where you don't know whether it's gonna be like a good effect or a bad effect. Now they're just talking about trends. So all violent crime, firearm related violent crime. So apparently violent crime was reducing, and then it sort of increased and now it's reducing again. Or I guess it reduced in 2019 and then, but with guns for some reason after 2013 it started increasing. But look at the difference. The highest for guns is around like 30 per 100,000 population, but the the crimes itself is 1,200, higher than 1,200 per 100,000. So, and now it's like closer to 1,000. So, guns are a really small part of all of this. Then, but the increase was reflected in most jurisdictions. Um, I don't know why that happened. Maybe wasn't it right? Like where the registry thing stopped in 2013. I'm not sure. The rate of firearm-related violent crime in Canada was found to be 20% higher in the 6 years than over the previous 6 years. Rates increased most in the rural north and south, with the highest rates reported in the rural north. So, urban uh, trends and farm, blah, blah. I guess these are averages. In urban, there was a small change, but not much. In rural, there was a noticeable bump. In rural south, in rural north. So I guess it goes on and on. I guess, but the main takeaway is the same. That gun crime did increase a bit in the preceding years. It's still not like a really big issue. Handguns are like the biggest culprits, and there's no data on whether it's illegal guns causing these things or it's legal guns. So we'll wait and see with how gun crime moves on. But yeah, like there's no push against this move. So, not that big of a push. At least there's going to be some conservatives. And yeah, ultimately it's not as consequential as with the US. But like looking at the US and gun crime is gonna be more fruitful in that sense. Uh, because that's where like a lot of gun crime happens, and especially like mass shootings, and especially um what do you call that, mass shootings in schools and stuff like that. Yeah, so I guess in the end this was a massive waste of time. I don't know. Just to say, we'll wait and see. Um, I don't think there's point in looking at it beyond this now.